resisting.
Detained. Stop resisting.
I'm an attorney. You have no legal basis to detain me.
I don't care what you are. Hands behind your back now.
Officer, you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights, and this entire interaction is being recorded.
Yo, he said he's
Officer Mitchell's voice cut through the humid summer air. You're being detained. Stop resisting. Marcus Reed remained perfectly calm, his voice measured and professional. I'm an attorney. You have no legal basis for this detention. The officer's tone grew more aggressive. I don't care what you are. Put your hands behind your back. Marcus looked directly at the body camera on the officer's chest. Officer, I'm telling you right now, you're violating my Fourth Amendment rights, and this entire interaction is being recorded. At exactly 2:47 p.m. on a scorching July afternoon in Lower Manhattan, a routine ferry ride to the Statue of Liberty turned into a constitutional nightmare. The body camera footage would later go viral, racking up over 24 million views across social media platforms and sparking protests in 3 major cities. But this wasn't your typical police misconduct video. This was different. This was a civil rights attorney who had spent 15 years defending people against police abuse, now experiencing it firsthand with cameras rolling. What happened next would shock the NYPD, spark a federal investigation, and prove that even knowing your rights doesn't always protect you from officers who think the badge puts them above the law. Character introduction. Marcus Jonathan Reed was not your average 38-year-old. While most people his age were climbing corporate ladders or settling into comfortable careers, Marcus was in federal courtrooms fighting civil rights cases against police departments across the Northeast. He graduated summa cum laude from Howard University School of Law in 2011, where he was editor of the Law Review. He clerked for a federal judge on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals for 2 years, then founded Reed & Associates civil rights law firm in 2015, specializing exclusively in police misconduct cases. Marcus had won 23 out of 27 cases against various police departments, securing over $18 million in settlements and judgments for his clients. He was known in legal circles as the closer because of his devastating cross-examination skills that made officers admit to constitutional violations on the witness stand. Marcus didn't just know the law, he lived it, he breathed it. He had memorized Supreme Court precedents the way most people memorize song lyrics. Terry versus Ohio, Graham versus Connor, Tennessee versus Garner. These weren't just case names to him, they were weapons in his legal arsenal. He had taught Fourth Amendment workshops to law students. He had written articles for law journals about qualified immunity abuse. He had been interviewed on CNN about police reform. And on this particular July day, all of that expertise was about to be put to the ultimate test. On July 18th, 2023, Marcus Reed was doing something millions of people do every summer in New York City, taking his visiting mother to see the Statue of Liberty. The sun was blazing over Lower Manhattan, reflecting off the Hudson River in blinding flashes of light. Tourists crowded the Battery Park area, speaking dozens of languages, their cameras pointed toward Lady Liberty in the distance. Everything was peaceful. Everything was normal. Everything was perfectly American. Marcus and his 64-year-old mother, Dorothy Reed, a retired school teacher from Atlanta, had just purchased tickets for the 3:15 p.m. ferry. They were standing near the security checkpoint at the Statue of Liberty Ferry Terminal, waiting in the shade, discussing the history Marcus had been explaining to her about the statue's construction. Marcus wasn't doing anything illegal. He wasn't trespassing. He wasn't threatening anyone. He wasn't causing a disturbance. He was simply standing with his mother, holding their ferry tickets, following every rule exactly as written, doing what thousands of tourists do every single day. Then, Officer David Mitchell and Officer Jennifer Santos approached. Marcus's heart didn't race with panic. It raced with immediate recognition. He had cross-examined enough officers to know exactly what was happening. He could see it in their body language, in the way they were already reaching for their handcuffs before they even spoke. He had defended dozens of clients who described this exact moment. Now he was living it. The officers who made contact were Officer David Mitchell, a 34-year-old NYPD patrol officer with about 8 years on the force, and his partner, Officer Jennifer Santos, 29, with 5 years of service. They were assigned to the tourist security detail around the ferry terminal. This was routine patrol for them. Walk around, look official, occasionally check bags, move along anyone who looks suspicious, or so they thought. "Excuse me, sir, can I see some identification?" Officer Mitchell said, his tone already carrying that particular blend of authority and assumption that brooks no disagreement. Marcus remained calm. Officer, may I ask what reasonable suspicion you have that I've committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime? This is where things started to go wrong for Officer Mitchell. Most people, when approached by police, immediately comply. They pull out their ID, they answer questions, they do whatever the officer asks because they've been taught that's what you're supposed to do. They don't know about Terry stops, they don't know about reasonable articulable suspicion, they don't know that in America, you actually don't have to identify yourself to police unless they have legal justification. Marcus knew all of this, and Officer Mitchell was about to find out. Officer Mitchell's jaw tightened. We're conducting random security checks in this area. I need to see your ID. Marcus responded, his voice professional and measured. Random security checks aren't a legal basis for demanding identification. Under New York law and the Fourth Amendment, you need reasonable suspicion of criminal activity to demand ID. Do you have that? Marcus's mother, Dorothy, stood beside him, her purse clutched tightly, her eyes widening. The body camera captured Officer Mitchell's face hardening. You could see the shift in his expression. He was used to compliance, not constitutional citations. He was irritated now. Sir, this is your last warning. Show me your ID or you're going to be detained. Detained for what? Marcus asked. Officer, I'm respectfully declining your request because you haven't articulated any legal basis for it. My mother and I are waiting for our ferry. We have tickets. We're not breaking any law. Officer Santos stepped closer, her hand moving to her belt. Sir, you're being argumentative. That's suspicious behavior. Marcus pulled out his phone and activated the recording app. I'm an attorney, Officer Santos, and I'm documenting this encounter. Respectfully questioning an officer's authority is not suspicious behavior, and it's certainly not illegal. It's protected by the First Amendment. Put the phone down, Officer Mitchell barked. Marcus didn't flinch. No, sir. I have a First Amendment right to record police officers in public. Glick versus Cuniff, First Circuit, 2011. The Supreme Court has declined to review that decision, letting it stand as precedent. This is where everything changed. This is the moment Officer Mitchell's ego took over. You think you're smart, Mitchell said, his voice rising. You think knowing some case names means you can disrespect police officers? The body camera captured what happened next frame by frame. Officer Mitchell grabbed Marcus's wrist, the one holding the phone. Officer, you are now committing assault, Marcus said, his voice loud and clear for the recording. You have no legal authority to touch me. You're under arrest for obstruction, Mitchell shouted. Marcus's voice remained steady. Obstruction of what? I'm not obstructing anything. There is no legitimate law enforcement activity to obstruct, Dorothy Reed gasped. Please, officers, we didn't do anything wrong. Officer Santos moved behind Marcus. Ma'am, step back or you'll be arrested too. Marcus remained calm even as Officer Mitchell twisted his arm behind his back. You're making a huge mistake, Officer Mitchell. Your badge number is 47825. Officer Santos, your badge number is 39214. I'm documenting those for the federal lawsuit that will follow this unconstitutional arrest. Officer Mitchell had never encountered someone like Marcus Reed. Most people he arrested were either actually breaking the law or were too scared to effectively challenge him. Most people he dealt with were confused, angry, or compliant. He had no idea he had just grabbed a civil rights attorney who had made a career out of destroying officers exactly like him in federal court. The handcuffs clicked shut. Marcus's mother was crying now, her phone out, recording everything. A crowd of tourists had stopped, their own phones raised, dozens of cameras capturing the scene. Marcus, Dorothy cried, what are they doing? Mom, keep recording, Marcus called out, his voice steady despite the handcuffs. Record everything. Get their badge numbers. Get the names of witnesses. Officer Mitchell pushed Marcus toward their patrol car, parked near the terminal entrance. You have the right to remain silent. Mitchell began reading the Miranda rights, clearly believing he was in control of this situation. Marcus interrupted. I'm invoking my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, and I'm requesting an attorney. Though I should mention, I am an attorney. I'm also specifically stating for your body camera, I do not consent to this arrest. I have not committed any crime. This is a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights, and both of you will be named as defendants in a federal civil rights lawsuit. Inside the patrol car, Marcus sat in the back seat, hands cuffed behind him, and did something that would later become a crucial piece of evidence. He spoke directly to the body camera he could see on the dashboard. My name is Marcus Jonathan Reed. I'm an attorney with Reed and Associates in Manhattan. My New York bar number is 5247819. I specialize in civil rights litigation against police departments. At approximately 2:47 p.m. on July 18, 2023, officers Mitchell and Santos approached me and my mother without reasonable suspicion, demanded ID without legal justification, and arrested me for refusing an illegal order. I was standing near the Statue of Liberty Ferry Terminal, breaking no laws, causing no disturbance. I clearly stated my constitutional rights. They arrested me anyway. This entire encounter has been recorded by multiple cameras, including these officers' body cameras, my phone, my mother's phone, and approximately 12 witnesses with phones who I observed recording. I'm stating for the record, this is false arrest, deprivation of rights under color of law, and assault under color of authority. The body camera captured Officer Santos turning to Officer Mitchell in the front seat. Dave, he's an attorney, she whispered. You could hear the concern in her voice now. Officer Mitchell's response was defensive. So what? He was obstructing. Officer Santos shook her head. He wasn't obstructing anything. He was just standing there. Dave, we didn't have reasonable suspicion. The realization was setting in. Officer Mitchell stared straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel. The body camera shows the exact moment he understood what he had done. His face went pale, his jaw clenched. He had just arrested a civil rights attorney for exercising constitutional rights, on camera with multiple witnesses in one of the most tourist-heavy locations in New York City. This wasn't going to disappear into the system. This was going to explode. They took Marcus to the 1st Precinct station house. The booking process was tense. The desk sergeant, a 20-year veteran named Rodriguez, took one look at the arrest report and called over Officer Mitchell. You arrested him for what? Rodriguez asked, reading the paperwork. Obstruction of governmental administration, Mitchell said, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Rodriguez looked at the body camera timestamp. And what was he obstructing? Mitchell hesitated. He refused to show ID during a security check. Sergeant Rodriguez closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Please tell me you had reasonable suspicion of a crime. The silence that followed was deafening. Rodriguez looked at Officer Santos. Did you have reasonable suspicion? Santos looked at the floor. He was acting nervous, Sergeant. Acting nervous isn't reasonable suspicion of a crime, Rodriguez said, his voice heavy with the weight of someone who knows a disaster when he sees one. Did he commit any crime? Any actual violation? Mitchell tried to salvage it. He was being argumentative and recording us. Rodriguez's expression said everything. Recording police officers in public is constitutionally protected, and being argumentative isn't a crime. Please tell me this body camera footage doesn't show exactly what I think it shows? Neither officer responded. Rodriguez turned to Marcus, who was still in handcuffs. Sir, I'm going to have someone process you out immediately. This arrest was improper. Marcus looked directly at Rodriguez. Sergeant, I appreciate that acknowledgement, but I'm also going to need your name and badge number for the lawsuit. Rodriguez, badge number 61347. And respectfully, Sergeant, processing me out immediately doesn't undo the violation. I was falsely arrested, handcuffed, transported in a police vehicle, and detained at this precinct. The damage is done. Now, most people who have been falsely arrested might file a complaint with Internal Affairs. Maybe they'd call a lawyer. Maybe they'd just try to move on with their lives and forget the whole traumatic experience. But Marcus Reed wasn't most people. By 9 p.m. that same night, less than 6 hours after his arrest, Marcus had already drafted a 42-page federal lawsuit. It wasn't just a complaint. It was a legal masterpiece. It was the kind of document that a seasoned civil rights attorney with 15 years of experience would create. It was thorough, professional, and completely devastating. The complaint named Officer David Mitchell, Officer Jennifer Santos, the City of New York, and the NYPD as defendants. It included 18 separate causes of action. False arrest under the Fourth Amendment, deprivation of rights under color of law, Title 42, United States Code, Section 1983, assault and battery under color of authority, First Amendment retaliation, intentional infliction of emotional distress. And the lawsuit didn't just rely on his testimony. Marcus had already collected contact information from 8 witnesses who recorded the encounter. He had already downloaded and preserved the videos from his phone and his mother's phone. He had already documented his injuries, the marks on his wrists from the handcuffs. He had already pulled case law showing a clear pattern of similar conduct by the NYPD. The complaint included frame-by-frame analysis of the body camera footage, which Marcus had already obtained through an emergency motion. It quoted the officers' exact words. It detailed their exact actions, time-stamped to the second. It cited 23 separate federal cases establishing that the officers' conduct was unconstitutional, and it included something that made this case even more powerful. Marcus had researched both officers' disciplinary histories. Officer Mitchell had 3 prior complaints for excessive force, all of which had been dismissed by Internal Affairs. Officer Santos had 2 prior complaints for unlawful detention. None of these complaints had resulted in any discipline. None of them had even resulted in additional training. Marcus's lawsuit didn't just argue that this was a bad arrest. It argued that this was part of a pattern and practice of constitutional violations that the NYPD knew about and did nothing to stop. That's what would make the city liable. That's what would make this case nearly impossible to defend. The NYPD's Internal Affairs Bureau received Marcus's lawsuit on a Monday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, both officers had been placed on modified duty, which means desk work, no badge, no gun. This wasn't normal. Usually, these processes take months just to get started. Officers stay on the street during investigations. The department circles the wagons, but Marcus's complaint was so detailed and so devastating that the NYPD couldn't ignore it. The body camera footage was pulled and reviewed by the Internal Affairs Commander, Captain Patricia Williams. She watched it once. Then she watched it again. Then she brought in the department's legal counsel to watch it with her. The footage confirmed everything Marcus had written in his complaint. There was no reasonable suspicion. There was no lawful basis for demanding identification. There was no obstruction. There was just two officers who escalated a lawful encounter into an unconstitutional arrest because they didn't like being questioned. But there was something else in the footage that made this case even more serious. The footage clearly showed Officer Mitchell grabbing Marcus's phone before he had any legal authority to do so. It showed him physically assaulting Marcus before announcing an arrest. It showed him threatening to arrest Dorothy Reed, a 64-year-old woman whose only action was recording police officers in public. Every single action violated clearly established constitutional law. And that's the key phrase, clearly established, because in civil rights cases, officers usually hide behind something called qualified immunity. It's a legal doctrine that protects officers from lawsuits unless they violated rights that were clearly established at the time. But Marcus's complaint systematically destroyed any qualified immunity defense. He cited cases from the Second Circuit, which covers New York, showing that every right he claimed was violated had been clearly established for decades. The investigation took 3 weeks in total. That's incredibly fast for this type of investigation. Most take 6 months to a year, but the evidence was so clear and Marcus's complaint was so thorough that there wasn't much to investigate. Everything was documented, everything was on camera, everything was undeniable. The Internal Affairs Bureau's findings were released in a detailed 20-page report. Officer Mitchell violated department policy by initiating contact without reasonable suspicion. Officer Mitchell violated department policy by demanding identification without legal authority. Officer Mitchell violated department policy by physically grabbing Marcus without justification. Officer Mitchell violated department policy by arresting Marcus without probable cause. Officer Santos violated department policy by failing to intervene when her partner committed these violations. The report recommended termination for Officer Mitchell and a 30-day suspension without pay for Officer Santos. But here's where it gets interesting. The NYPD tried to settle with Marcus before the disciplinary process was complete. The city's legal department reached out to Marcus's firm with a settlement offer. $150,000 to make the case go away quietly. No admission of wrongdoing, confidentiality agreement, standard stuff. Marcus rejected it immediately. He didn't counteroffer. He didn't negotiate. He just said no, because Marcus understood something that the city hadn't figured out yet. This case was going to trial, and he was going to win big. The city came back 2 weeks later. $350,000. Marcus said no. The city came back again. $750,000. Marcus said no. His mother, Dorothy, asked him why he kept rejecting the money. "Baby, that's more money than I made in 10 years of teaching. Why won't you take it?" Marcus explained it to her. "Mom, this isn't about the money. This is about making sure this never happens to anyone else. If I settle quietly, these officers learn nothing. The department learns nothing. The next person who stands up for their rights gets arrested just like I did. But if this goes to trial, if a jury hears what happened, if the verdict is public, maybe, just maybe, things change." The case went to trial 14 months later in federal court in the Southern District of New York. The jury selection took 3 days. Marcus's legal team was careful to select jurors who understood civil rights, who had experience with police, and who wouldn't automatically defer to officers just because of the uniform. The trial lasted 8 days. The city's attorneys tried every defense they could think of. They argued that Officer Mitchell had reasonable suspicion because the area around the ferry terminal is a high security zone. Marcus showed the jury that thousands of people stand in that exact spot every day without being detained. They argued that Marcus was acting suspiciously by questioning the officers. Marcus played the body camera footage showing that he was calm, respectful, and clearly articulating legal principles. They argued that Marcus should have just shown his ID, and none of this would have happened. This is where Marcus destroyed them. He stood up during his closing argument and looked directly at the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, the city's attorneys just told you that I should have given up my constitutional rights to avoid being arrested. Think about what they're saying. They're saying that in America, if a police officer asks you to do something, even if that officer has no legal right to ask, even if you're breaking no law, even if you're minding your own business, you should just comply. You should just give up your rights because it's easier. Is that the country you want to live in? Is that the Constitution you want? The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, the verdict was unanimous. They found that Officer Mitchell had violated Marcus's Fourth Amendment rights through false arrest. They found that Officer Mitchell had violated Marcus's First Amendment rights by retaliating against him for recording. They found that Officer Santos had failed to intervene. They found that the city of New York was liable for failure to properly train and supervise its officers. And then came the damages. $50,000 in compensatory damages for the false arrest. $200,000 for emotional distress, and the big one, $3.2 million in punitive damages. Punitive damages are designed to punish and deter. They're meant to send a message, and the jury sent that message loud and clear. This kind of constitutional violation will cost you. The total verdict was $3.45 million. After attorney's fees and costs, Marcus personally received about $2.8 million. But he didn't keep most of it. He created a legal defense fund for people who couldn't afford attorneys when their rights were violated by police. He donated $500,000 to civil rights organizations. He set up a scholarship fund at Howard Law School for students interested in civil rights litigation. Marcus Reed continued to practice civil rights law. After his case, his firm received over 300 inquiries from potential clients. He expanded his practice, hiring 4 more attorneys. He became even more well-known in legal circles, not just as an attorney, but as someone who had lived the experience his clients go through. He testified before the New York City Council about police reform. He consulted with the Department of Justice on pattern and practice investigations. He wrote a book about constitutional rights during police encounters that became required reading in several law school civil rights courses. His mother, Dorothy, became an activist in her own right. She joined a police accountability organization in Atlanta and spoke at community meetings about what she witnessed that day in New York. As for the officers, Officer David Mitchell was terminated from the NYPD 3 weeks after the verdict. He appealed through the police union, but the appeals board upheld the termination. As of now, Mitchell is working in private security in New Jersey. He cannot work in law enforcement in New York State. Officer Jennifer Santos completed her 30-day suspension and returned to duty, but she was transferred to a desk position. She's still with the NYPD, but she's no longer on patrol. The department added mandatory training on constitutional rights during encounters. They revised their policies on identification demands. They implemented new body camera review procedures. But here's the question. Did anything really change? In the year following Marcus's verdict, the NYPD still had over 200 complaints of unlawful detention. The department still settled dozens of civil rights lawsuits. Officers still stop people without reasonable suspicion. The system is bigger than one case. But Marcus's case became a teaching moment. It became precedent that other attorneys could cite. It became a warning to officers that there are consequences. This story isn't just about Marcus Reed and Officers Mitchell and Santos. It's about power. It's about accountability. It's about the gap between constitutional rights on paper and constitutional rights in practice. Most people don't know their Fourth Amendment rights in detail. They don't know that they can refuse to show ID. They don't know that acting nervous isn't reasonable suspicion. They don't know that recording police is protected by the First Amendment. And some officers count on that ignorance. They count on people being too scared or too uninformed or too intimidated to question them. But when you encounter someone like Marcus, someone who has expertise, who knows exactly what officers can and cannot do, who can cite case law from memory, the power dynamic shifts. The badge doesn't automatically win. The uniform doesn't automatically command submission. Knowledge becomes the equalizer. Now let's address something that people brought up when this story went viral. Some commenters online said that Marcus was asking for trouble. They said he should have just shown his ID and avoided the whole situation. They said he was being difficult on purpose. Here's the thing. Marcus wasn't being difficult. He was exercising his constitutional rights. If exercising your rights is considered being difficult, then the problem isn't with the person exercising the rights. The problem is with a system that treats constitutional protections as optional suggestions that you should waive whenever an officer asks. Yes, there is a reality that refusing to comply with police, even when they're wrong, can be dangerous. Marcus knew that risk. He calculated it, and he decided that standing up for the principle was worth it. But the fact that exercising your rights is considered dangerous tells you everything you need to know about the problem. So what's the lesson from all of this? What should people take away from Marcus Reed's story? First, know your rights. You don't have to be a lawyer to understand the basics of the Fourth Amendment, the First Amendment, and what police can and cannot do during encounters. There are resources available. Study them. Second, document everything. If you're in an encounter with police, record it if you can safely do so. Get witness information. Get badge numbers. Get names. Documentation is power in court. Third, stay calm. Marcus never raised his voice. He never became emotional. He never gave the officers any legitimate reason to escalate. That composure made his case stronger. Fourth, follow through. Most people who experience police misconduct don't file complaints because they think nothing will happen. Marcus proved that accountability is possible, but only if you pursue it. Fifth, understand that one case won't change the system, but it can contribute to change. Marcus's verdict became part of a larger conversation about police accountability. One attorney, one encounter, 2 hours, and the entire trajectory of multiple lives changed. That's the power of knowledge. That's the importance of accountability. That's what happens when someone refuses to back down in the face of unlawful authority. This story matters because it's not just about Marcus Reed and 2 NYPD officers. It's about every person who has been illegally stopped, searched, or arrested. It's about every time someone's constitutional rights were violated and nothing happened. It's about every officer who believed the badge made them untouchable. It's about every system that protects bad cops instead of holding them accountable. Marcus Reed's story shows that you can stand up for your rights. You can challenge unlawful authority. You can hold officers accountable, and sometimes you can win. Not every story ends this way. Not every false arrest results in a multi-million-dollar verdict. Not every lawsuit leads to change. But this one did, and that matters. That's Marcus's legacy. Not just his $3.5 million verdict, but showing millions of people that knowledge is power, that rights matter, and that accountability is possible. This is the story of how a civil rights attorney destroyed NYPD officers and won $3.5 million after an illegal arrest. But more than that, it's a story about the Constitution, about courage, and about refusing to accept that might makes right. This story is for educational purposes only.